Alarms blared through Matthew Dixon's gunmetal grey fighter as sensors picked up the frantic distress call from planet Romulus. He stared at the flashing red screen, his scarred finger hovering over the message. Open or ignore. A plea for help from the edge of oblivion, where few chose to tread. A secure channel reserved for catastrophes crackled to life. Matthew, it's Weason. The Galactic Council screwed up big time. We sent our best delegation to Romulus to try diplomacy. Instead, the Romulan bastards blasted the ship out of the sky. Matthew sneered at the screen. And you want me to clean up your mess? You're the only one who can. A few survivors made it to their escape pods, but they're surrounded by pissed-off Romulans. If they die, it means war. No one else is crazy enough to set foot on that hellhole. Matthew's eyes narrowed as he read between the lines. What's so important that you'd risk everything? Weason hesitated. The Romulans have unobtainium. We need it to power our quantum fusion reactors. Without that, the Council's fleets are dead in the water. The entire balance of power shifts. Shit. Matthew ran a hand through his graying hair. Why me? I'm no diplomat. The Romulans respect humans. They know you don't mess around. They might talk to you. Matthew barked a laugh. Or shoot me on sight. I won't lie, it's a suicide mission. But if you pull it off, humanity gets a council seat. Matthew's fingers drummed the console. Risk his life and maybe die horribly or let the galaxy burn. Not much of a choice. I'll do it. But you'd better keep your end of the deal. He terminated the call and gripped the controls, his ship banking hard toward the bleak silhouette of Romulus. As the planet's scarred surface filled his viewscreen, pockmarked by war, he knew this was a one-way trip. The lives of the delegation, the future of the Council, and humanity's place in the stars, all rested on him, the only human crazy enough to face down the Romulans on their home turf. It was time to see if the Butcher of Proxima still had his edge. Matthew flipped switches, diverting power to weapons and shields. Live or die, he'd give the Romulans hell. For the delegation, for humanity, for the whole damn galaxy. His finger stabbed the comm button. Dixon to surviving delegates, I'm inbound to your position. If you're still alive, get ready for a hot extraction. Silence. Then a ragged voice. Thank the stars, we're here, but hurry, they're almost through the doors. Locking coordinates, Matthew pushed throttle to full burn, the ship screaming toward the planet's surface. Romulus grew in the viewscreen, a world of rubble and ruin, forged in centuries of unrelenting war. The perfect place for a man like him, who'd spent his life dealing death across the stars. He cracked his knuckles, a predatory smile spreading across his face. Time to show these Romulan assholes why you never corner a human. Matthew's scanners chirped in alarm as the Romulan fighters screamed toward his ship, their weapons primed. Unidentified vessel, state your purpose immediately or be destroyed. A harsh voice crackled over the comm. Matthew took a breath. This is Matthew Dixon of the Terran Union. I'm here to rescue the Galactic Council delegation that crashed on your world. Ha! A likely story, human, the Romulan commander sneered. The Council sent spies to steal our secrets. We were well within our rights to eliminate them. Damn it, this was going south fast. Think, Dixon, think. Listen, Commander. I'm not here to spy or steal. Let me land and I'll prove it to you man to man. Unless you're afraid a single human can beat your best warrior. Silence stretched out. Finally the Romulan spoke, voice dripping with menace. Very well, Dixon, you may land. But if you lose or deceive us, your death will be legendary in its agony. Matthew guided his ship down to the barren surface, a craggy plain strewn with jagged boulders. A ring of armed Romulans encircled the landing site, weapons trained on his ship. The hatch hissed open. Matthew stepped out, a lone figure facing down an army. A burly Romulan strode forward, his face a mask of arrogance. I am Kyrus, the commander's son. I challenge you, human, to single combat. If by some miracle you win, you may search for survivors. When you lose, you die. Matthew cracked his neck, falling into a fighting stance. Bring it on, Kyrus, let's dance. They clashed in a whirlwind of fists and feet, superhuman strength pitted against lightning reflexes. Punches shattered stone, kicks cracked ribs, blood spattered the grey dust. An eternity later it was over. Matthew stood over Kyrus's prone form, his body a map of bruises and cuts. The Romulan lay broken, beaten, but alive. Kyrus coughed, spitting blood. You have won, human. You may proceed, but do not think this is over. Matthew nodded curtly, then limped back to his ship for a medkit. As he stemmed the bleeding and bound his wounds, a faint ping sounded from the comm unit. A signal from the delegation. Some still lived. But where? The coordinates pointed deep into Romulan territory, and the signal was fading fast. Matthew gritted his teeth against the pain, his mind racing. He had to find them, before the Romulans did, before it was too late. Supplies, weapons, a fast vehicle, that's what he needed now, and a whole lot of luck. He glanced up at the crimson sky, imagining the survivors huddled in fear, praying for rescue, praying for him. "I'm coming," he whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." Ignoring his body's screams of protest, Matthew heaved himself up and began to pack. It was time to venture into the jaws of hell itself, for the delegation, for humanity. For the mission. Matthew loaded up on all the supplies and weapons he could salvage from his ship. He knew he had to travel light and fast. The signal was already fading. He couldn't afford any delays. He set out across the blasted landscape, picking his way through fields of jagged obsidian that shredded his boots. Geysers of scalding steam erupted from cracks in the ground, the heat searing his exposed skin. He skirted around bubbling pools of acid, their noxious fumes burning his lungs. As he drew closer to the coordinates, he spotted signs of activity. Footprints in the ash, discarded bits of tech, Romulan design, scorch marks from disruptor fire. Someone else had reached the site first. A glint of metal caught his eye. He whirled just as a disruptor bolt sizzled past his ear. Romulan scavengers, half a dozen of them, poured out from behind the rocks, weapons blazing. Matthew dove for cover, returning fire. His aim was true. 2 scavengers went down, holes smoking in their chests, but the rest kept coming, forcing him back with a hail of green bolts. He huddled behind a boulder, wincing as shots spanged off the stone. He was outgunned and outnumbered, but he'd been in worse scrapes. Time to even the odds. Reaching into his pack, he pulled out a concussion grenade, primed it, lobbed it over the rock. The scavengers shouted in alarm. Too late. The blast wave sent them flying, bones shattering on impact. In the sudden silence, Matthew advanced, gun leveled. One scavenger still twitched, trying to crawl away. Matthew planted a boot on his back, pinning him. "The council delegation, where are they?" The scavenger spat blood, glaring up at him. "Tarok has them, Warlord Tarok. He shot the ship down. Didn't want the council interfering." "Where?" "His fortress, in the mountains." The scavenger coughed, wheezing. "You'll never get in. It's guarded like a Kreshak's horde." Matthew's eyes narrowed. A frontal assault would be suicide, but maybe if he could pass as one of them. He stared down at the scavenger, an idea forming. "You're going to tell me everything about that fortress, every entrance, every guard post, and maybe I'll let you live." Using the information and equipment he'd scavenged, Matthew crafted a disguise, transforming himself into a battle-scarred Romulan mercenary. He fell in with a group of scavengers returning to the fortress, laden with salvage. The great metal doors rumbled open and they filed inside. Stone walls rose up on all sides, bristling with disruptor turrets. Tarok's lair. Matthew kept his head down, following the others through the maze of corridors. Patrols marched past, but his disguise held. Finally, deep in the bowels of the fortress, he found them. The council delegates locked in a dank cell, beaten and bloodied, but alive. He was reaching for the lock when a cold voice stopped him in his tracks. Well, what do we have here?" Tarok emerged from the shadows, a cruel smile on his craggy face. "A human masquerading as one of us? I'm almost impressed." Matthew turned slowly, hand dropping to his blade. "It's over, Tarok, let them go." Tarok snarled, drawing his own sword. "You'll have to go through me first." They clashed in the narrow corridor, blades flickering in the gloom. Tarok was strong, his blows shaking Matthew's arm, but Matthew was faster, darting in to land stinging cuts. Sparks flew as they traded strikes, neither giving ground. Blood spattered the walls. Both bore wounds, but neither would yield. With a roar, Matthew lunged, driving his blade through Tarok's chest. The warlord staggered back, eyes wide with shock. He crumpled to the floor, sword clattering from his grasp. Panting, Matthew turned to the cell, slicing through the lock with a single stroke. The delegate stumbled out, blinking in the sudden light. "Matthew," Weason croaked, clutching a broken arm. "I knew you'd come." Before Matthew could reply, alarms blared through the fortress. The hair on his neck stood up. They'd been discovered. "We need to move now." He herded the survivors down the corridor, back the way he'd come, but the way was blocked, Romulan soldiers pouring in from all sides. They were trapped, caught between the hammer and the anvil. Disruptors raised, the Romulans advanced, murder in their eyes. Matthew glanced at Weason, at the battered delegates. He'd come too far to fail now. Tightening his grip on his blade, he stepped forward to meet the enemy rush. One way or another, he'd see this through. No matter the cost. Matthew charged into the Romulan phalanx, his blade a blur of steel. He parried a disruptor shot, the energy bolt ricocheting into the wall. Lunging forward, he drove his sword through a soldier's chest, the Romulan crumpling. The delegates fought beside him, wielding scavenged weapons with desperate ferocity. Weason smashed a Romulan's face with a metal pipe, green blood splattering. Another delegate tackled a soldier, the two grappling on the ground. But for every Romulan they cut down, two more took their place. They were a green tide, relentless and inexorable. Disruptor fire filled the air, searing Matthew's flesh as bolts grazed him. "Fall back!" he roared over the din of battle. "Make for the control room!" The group fought their way down the corridor, leaving a trail of Romulan bodies. They reached the control room, Matthew and two delegates holding the door, while Weason limped to the console. "Cover me!" Weason shouted, his fingers flying over the keys. Romulan fists pounded on the door, the metal denting. Matthew braced himself against the bulkhead, muscles straining as he held the door shut. Sweat and blood ran into his eyes, blurring his vision. The door shuddered under the impacts, hinges starting to give. "Got it!" Weason cried, yanking a data chip from the console. "I've got their plans, everything." "Then let's get the hell out of here," Matthew grunted. He counted down. 3, 2, 1, go! They burst from the room, surprising the Romulans massed outside. Matthew led the charge, his blade a silver arc cutting down foes left and right. The delegates fought like demons, driven by the knowledge of what they now carried. They battled through the fortress, the hangar bay tantalizingly close. A final push would see them there. Freedom was in their grasp. But the Romulans knew it too. A fresh wave of warriors blocked their path, weapons leveled. At their head stood Keris, his face a mask of rage. "You will go no further, human," he snarled, his disruptor aimed at Matthew's heart. "The doomsday weapon will be our salvation. I will not let you stop us." "Your weapon will only bring death," Matthew shouted back. "To the Romulans, to the galaxy, is that what you want?" "What I want is to see the Romulan banner fly over the stars," Keris roared, "and I will start with your broken corpse." He fired, the disruptor bolt screaming towards Matthew. But Matthew was already moving, throwing himself to the side. The bolt passed so close, it singed his hair. Then the two warriors were on each other, blades clashing in a shower of sparks. They dueled across the hangar, parrying and thrusting, each seeking an opening. Around them, the battle raged, disruptor bolts filling the air. Keris was strong, driven by fanatical belief. Each blow felt like it would break Matthew's arm. But Matthew was fast, dodging and weaving, letting Keris spend his fury. Their swords locked, the two warriors face to face. Keris's eyes were alight with zealous fire. "Why do you fight, human?" he hissed. "For your counsel." Your precious delegates, what are they to you? I fight for what's right, Matthew growled through gritted teeth. I fight to stop you maniacs from destroying everything. With a burst of strength, he shoved Keras back. The Romulan staggered, his guard opening for a heartbeat. Matthew lunged, his blade sinking into Keras's chest. Keras looked down at the sword impaling him, shock and disbelief on his face. No, he whispered. It cannot be. He sank to his knees, green blood pooling on the floor. Around them the Romulans faltered, seeing their leader fall. It's over, Keras, Matthew said, staring down at his vanquished foe. Call off your men. No one else needs to die today. Keras looked up at him, life fading from his eyes. He saw the resolve in Matthew's gaze, the implacable will. With his last breath, he keyed his comm. Stand down, he rasped. The human has won. As the Romulans lowered their weapons, stunned and confused, Matthew turned to the delegates. To the ship now. They ran up the ramp, Matthew taking the controls. The engines roared to life, the ship lifting from the hangar floor. Disruptor bolts spanged off the hull, but then they were soaring up, out, free of the fortress at last. Matthew sagged back in his seat, exhaustion hitting him like a hammer. But there was no time to rest. They had the Romulans' plans, the key to stopping the doomsday weapon. The real fight was just beginning. Romulus dwindled below them as they streaked for open space. In the co-pilot's seat, Weazen turned to Matthew, his face grim. The Council needs to see this data immediately, he said, holding up the chip. If the Romulans complete that weapon... They won't, Matthew promised. He met Weazen's gaze, steel in his eyes. We'll stop them, whatever it takes. He gunned the engines, the stars blurring into lines of light. The battle for Romulus was over, but the war for the galaxy was just getting started. The ship streaked through hyperspace, the stars blurring into lines of light. In the cockpit, Matthew leaned back in his seat, exhaustion etched on his face. Beside him, Weazen pored over the data they'd stolen from Tarok's fortress. This is big, Matthew, Weazen said, his voice tight. If the Romulans complete this doomsday weapon... They won't, Matthew said, his jaw set. We'll make sure of it. The ship dropped out of hyperspace, the gleaming spires of the Galactic Council's headquarters filling the viewscreen. As they docked, a crowd of dignitaries and reporters swarmed the landing pad. Matthew and the survivors pushed through the throng, ignoring the shouted questions and flashing cameras. They had no time for interviews or accolades. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The council chamber was in an uproar as Matthew and Weazen presented their findings. Gasps of shock and murmurs of disbelief filled the air as the council members saw the Romulans' plans laid bare. This is an act of war, one councillor shouted. We must respond with force. No, another argued. We must seek a diplomatic solution. Violence will only breed more violence. As the debate raged on, Matthew paced the floor, his frustration mounting. Every second they wasted, the Romulans grew closer to unleashing their weapon. Finally, he could take no more. He slammed his fist on the table, silencing the room. While you sit here and argue, the Romulans are preparing to wipe us all out, he growled. We need action, not words. The council fell silent, all eyes on Matthew. Matthew Dixon, the council leader said, his voice grave, you have done a great service to the galaxy. You have our gratitude. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. In light of your heroic actions, we offer you a seat on this council as humanity's representative. Matthew stared at him, stunned. A council seat. It was an honor beyond measure, a chance to shape the future of the galaxy. But as he looked around the room at the bickering politicians and bureaucrats, he knew it was not his path. I'm a soldier, not a politician, he said, shaking his head. And right now the galaxy needs a soldier. Ignoring the council's protests, he turned and strode from the chamber. He had a plan, and he would see it through, with or without the council's blessing. Hours later, Matthew crept through the darkened corridors of the council's shipyard. The prototype stealth ship loomed before him, sleek and deadly. He moved quickly, disabling the security systems with ease. In minutes he was in the cockpit, powering up the engines. As the ship lifted off, alarms blared throughout the facility, but it was too late. Matthew was gone, vanishing into the night sky. He knew he was disobeying orders, defying the Council's will. But he had no choice. The Romulans had to be stopped, no matter the cost. As he plotted a course for Romulan space, he thought of Keris and Tarok, of the delegation he'd rescued and the battles he'd fought. All of it had led him here, to this moment. He was humanity's champion, the galaxy's last hope, and he would not fail. The ship tore through the void, invisible to sensors, undetectable by patrols. Matthew pushed the engines to their limit, racing against time. At last he reached his destination, the secret base where the Romulans were building their doomsday weapon. He set the ship down in a hidden canyon, miles from the base. Alone, armed with nothing but his wits and a few stolen explosives, he set out on foot. The journey was treacherous, the terrain rugged and unforgiving, but Matthew pressed on, driven by a singular purpose. As he neared the base, he could see the massive construction site, swarming with Romulan workers and guards. The doomsday weapon loomed above it all, a monstrous edifice of metal and fury. Matthew crept closer, sticking to the shadows. He planted his explosives at key points along the perimeter, setting the timers with steady hands. Just as he was about to make his escape, a familiar voice stopped him in his tracks. "Going somewhere, human?" Matthew turned to see Keris standing before him, a squad of Romulan soldiers at his back. "I knew you'd come," Keris said, his eyes hard. "You couldn't resist playing the hero." "I'm no hero," Matthew said, his hand inching toward his blaster. "I'm just a man trying to do what's right." "And what gives you the right to decide what's right for the galaxy?" Keris snarled. "The Romulans will rise and the Council will fall. It is inevitable." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Matthew said. And with that he drew his blaster and fired. The base erupted into chaos, alarms blaring, soldiers shouting. Matthew and Keris fought through the corridors, their weapons flashing in the gloom. Around them the base shook and crumbled as the explosives detonated. In the heart of the weapon chamber, they faced each other for the final time. Battered, bloody, but unbroken. "It's over, Keris," Matthew said, aiming his blaster. "The weapon is destroyed. Your plan has failed." Keris laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You think this is the end? It's only the beginning." He lunged at Matthew, his blade flashing. Matthew dodged, firing wildly. The two men grappled, struggling for control. The timer on the final explosives ticked down, seconds left. Matthew knew he had to end this now. With a burst of strength, he threw Keris off him. The Romulan stumbled back, his eyes widening as he saw the timer. In that moment, something changed in Keris's face. The anger, the hatred, it all fell away. In its place was a look of profound sadness. "Go," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Leave me." Matthew hesitated, torn, but the timer was almost out. He had no choice. He ran, sprinting for the exit as the final seconds ticked away. Behind him, he heard Keris shouting orders, telling his men to evacuate. Then the world exploded in fire and light. The shockwave slammed into Matthew, throwing him clear of the base. He hit the ground hard, rolling to a stop. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but he was alive. Slowly, painfully, he got to his feet. The base was gone, reduced to rubble and ash. The doomsday weapon was no more. But so was Keris. In the end, he had sacrificed himself to save his men, to buy Matthew time to escape. Matthew limped back to his ship, his body aching, his heart heavy. He had won, but at what cost? As he took off, leaving the smoking ruins behind, he knew his mission was far from over. The Council would not be pleased with his actions. There would be consequences, repercussions. But for now he had done what needed to be done. He had saved countless lives, even if it meant sacrificing his own future. For that was the burden of being human, to make the hard choices, to bear the weight of the galaxy on their shoulders. And as Matthew flew off into the stars, he knew he would always be ready to answer that call, no matter where it took him. Even if it meant becoming an outcast, a rogue agent, a wanderer of the stars. For he was human, and that was his destiny. To stand on the front lines, to fight for what was right, even when the galaxy turned its back on him. And so he flew on into the uncertain future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Alone but unbroken, a hero even if the galaxy would never know his name. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.